Imagine, if you will, sinking slowly into the deepest, quietest corners of our world, where light has never touched and where creatures drift like living dreams through endless blue-black waters. Tonight, we'll journey together to the ocean's most mysterious depths, where reality becomes more fantastical than any fairy tale. Before we begin this gentle voyage, if you enjoy relaxing science stories like this one, feel free to subscribe, give this video a like, and comment below. Let me know what country you're watching from and what time you're listening to this tonight. Your presence here, wherever you are in the world, makes this shared journey all the more special. Now, close your eyes if you feel comfortable doing so. Picture yourself floating on the surface of a calm, moonlit ocean. The water is warm against your skin, supporting you completely. Above, stars twinkle like scattered diamonds across velvet sky. But tonight, we won't be looking up at the stars. We'll be discovering the living stars that dance in the darkness far below. Take a deep breath with me, and as you exhale, feel yourself beginning to sink, ever so gently, into the welcoming embrace of the deep. The surface grows distant above us, a shimmering memory of light, as we descend into a world where the impossible becomes beautifully, peacefully real. What if I told you that beneath the waves you've walked beside, beneath the familiar blue that stretches to every horizon, there exists a universe more alien than Mars, more mysterious than the farthest galaxy? Here, in the deep ocean that covers most of our planet, creatures live and breathe and dream in ways that would make the most imaginative storyteller pause in wonder. Picture this, right now, as you're settling into comfort, preparing for sleep. Miles beneath the ocean's surface, a jellyfish the size of a dinner plate is pulsing through the water like a living galaxy. Its body is transparent as the finest glass, but within it, veins of light pulse and flow like liquid starlight. It has no brain, no heart as we know them, yet it navigates the endless dark with an ancient wisdom that predates the first forests. On land out in trenches deeper than Mount Everest is tall, where the pressure would crush a submarine like an empty soda can, fish swim with lights built into their very skin. They carry their own constellation wherever they go, each species blinking in its own gentle rhythm, like a slow, peaceful Morse code spoken in the language of living light. And what of the giant squid, that creature of legend and dream? For centuries, sailors whispered stories of tentacled monsters rising from the depths. But the truth, when we finally discovered it, was far more beautiful than any monster tale. These gentle giants of the deep drift through their world like enormous intelligent clouds, their eyes the largest eyes in the animal kingdom, as wide as dinner plates, perfectly designed to catch the faintest glimmer of light in their hide. Forever dark home. Consider the vampire squid, whose name sounds fearsome, but whose reality is as peaceful as a meditation. Despite its dramatic title, it doesn't hunt or chase or frighten. Instead, it drifts through the water like a living umbrella, turning itself inside out when startled, transforming into a ball of velvet spines that harm no one, simply saying, quietly and firmly, "I am here and I choose peace." These creatures exist in a world where up and down lose their meaning, where the only directions are toward warmth or toward cold, toward the faint glow of a fellow traveler, or toward the comforting darkness of solitude. They live in 3 dimensions, in a way we surface dwellers can barely imagine, free to move through their liquid sky in any direction their quiet impulses suggest. What draws us to these mysterious beings? Perhaps it's because they remind us that Earth still holds secrets, that wonder still exists in the most unexpected places. In our age of satellites and internet, when it seems every corner of the world has been mapped and photographed, the deep ocean remains largely unexplored. As mysterious as it was to the first humans who stood on shore and wondered what lay beyond the horizon. Scientists estimate that we've explored less than 5% of our oceans. That means 95% of our planet's living space remains as unknown to us as the surface of distant moons. Down there, in that vast, quiet frontier, new species are discovered regularly, creatures so unusual, so perfectly adapted to their impossible world, that they expand our very definition of what life can be. Think about that as you drift towards sleep tonight. In the deepest places on Earth, life finds a way not just to survive, but to flourish, to become beautiful, to become extraordinary. In the crushing pressure and eternal darkness, creatures have learned to make their own light, to find each other across vast distances, to live with a grace and patience that we, in our hurried surface world, might do well to learn from. Asterisk, asterisk, let us drift down now, leaving the familiar world of sunlight and surface waves behind. As we descend through the water column, that beautiful scientific term for the layers of ocean that stack like invisible stories, one upon another, the very nature of life begins to change around us. First, we pass through the sunlight zone, where familiar fish dart between coral reefs and kelp forests sway like underwater meadows. Here, plants still photosynthesize, still turn sunlight into life the way every garden on land does. But this zone is just the very beginning of our journey, like the first page of a very long, very beautiful book. At about 200 meters down, roughly the height of a 60-story building, something magical happens. The last traces of sunlight fade away, and we enter what scientists call the twilight zone. Here begins the realm of bioluminescence, that almost fairy tale ability of creatures to create their own light through gentle chemical reactions in their bodies. Imagine the fireflies of summer evenings, those tiny sparks of gold that dance through warm air at dusk. Now imagine that same miracle, but transformed for an underwater world. The creatures here don't just flash once and fade. They pulse, they glow, they create patterns of light as complex and beautiful as any human art. Some flash in rapid sequence like biological Morse code. Others emit a steady, gentle glow, like underwater nightlights guiding travelers through the dark. The science behind this living light is surprisingly simple and elegant. Inside the bodies of these creatures are special cells called photophores, literally light carriers. Within these cells, a chemical called luciferin combines with an enzyme called luciferase, along with oxygen and a bit of energy. When these elements meet, they create light without heat, a cold illumination that would be impossible with fire or electricity. It's chemistry transformed into poetry, biology becoming art. But why do these creatures make light in a world where light doesn't exist naturally? The reasons are as varied and beautiful as the creatures themselves. Some use bioluminescence to find mates, flashing specific patterns that say, across the dark water, I am here, I am like you, let us find each other in this vast space. Others use it for protection, creating bright flashes that startle predators, or clouds of glowing particles that confuse attackers, while the light maker slips quietly away, perhaps most wonderfully. Some deep-sea creatures use their lights for hunting, but not in any violent way. They create gentle lures, soft glowing attractions that draw smaller creatures close. The anglerfish, with its glowing lure that dangles in front of its mouth like a living fishing rod, waits with infinite patience for a curious visitor. It's a reminder that even predation in the deep sea often happens with a kind of quiet grace, a natural rhythm as gentle as breathing. As we continue our descent, the pressure around us increases gradually, steadily. For every 10 meters we sink, the pressure increases by the weight of 1 atmosphere. By the time we reach a kilometer down, the pressure is 100 times greater than at the surface. Yet the creatures here don't struggle against this pressure. They've evolved to live within it, to find it as natural and comfortable as we find the air pressure at sea level. Their bodies are often soft, flexible, filled with fluids rather than gases that might compress. They move through the water with an effortless grace that speaks of perfect adaptation, perfect peace with their environment. They remind us that what seems impossible from one perspective can be beautifully natural from another. The temperature, too, is dropping as we descend. Near the surface, ocean water might be warm enough for swimming. But here in the deep, the temperature hovers just above freezing year-round, creating a world of perpetual, gentle coolness. Yet this isn't the harsh cold of winter wind, but rather the steady, quiet coolness of a cave in summer, constant, peaceful, surrounding these creatures like a comfortable blanket that never changes. Asterisk, asterisk, in the year 1872, a sailing ship named HMS Challenger departed from Portsmouth, England, beginning what would become the first great voyage of deep-sea discovery. Picture this vessel, a converted Royal Navy ship, cutting through Atlantic swells under billowing white canvas, carrying not weapons of war, but instruments of wonder, dredging nets, thermometers, and the boundless curiosity of scientists who dared to ask, what lives in the deepest places of our world? For 3.5 years, the Challenger expedition sailed across every ocean, stopping at 362 locations around the globe. At each stop, they lowered their nets into the abyss, never knowing what impossible creatures might emerge from the darkness below. The scientists aboard worked with the patience of monks, the dedication of artists, cataloging and sketching and marveling at each bizarre and beautiful form of life they discovered. Before this voyage, most scientists believed the deep ocean was lifeless, a cold, dark desert where nothing could possibly survive. They called it the azoic zone, meaning without life. The pressure was too great, they reasoned, the cold too bitter, the darkness too complete. Life, they were certain, was a surface phenomenon, limited to the thin shell of sea and land where sunlight could reach. How wrong they were, and how wonderful that they were wrong. From the very first haul of their nets, the Challenger expedition began pulling up creatures that seemed to have swum straight out of dreams. There were sea cucumbers as large as pillows, their soft bodies pulsing gently with each movement. Glass sponges that looked like spun crystal, so delicate and beautiful that they seemed more like artworks than living beings. Fish with enormous eyes, perfectly adapted to catch the faintest glimmer of light in their forever dark world. One of the expedition's naturalists, a gentle man named Charles Wyville Thompson, wrote in his journal about the first time they hauled up a net full of deep-sea creatures. He described the deck of the ship in the lamplight, covered with beings unlike anything in any museum or textbook. It was, he wrote, like opening a book written in a language we had never seen before, but somehow always knew existed. Among their most remarkable discoveries was a creature they initially thought was a plant, a delicate, branching thing that swayed gently in the current, like an underwater fern. Only when they observed it more closely did they realize it was an animal, a deep-sea coral that had learned to live without sunlight, feeding on the gentle rain of organic matter that drifts down from the surface world like snow. The expedition also encountered their first giant tube worms, creatures that seemed to challenge every assumption about how life works. These beings, sometimes several feet long, lived in permanent tubes they had built around themselves, extending feathery gills into the current to filter nutrients from the water. They had no mouths, no stomachs as we understand them, yet they thrived in the deepest places on Earth, through a partnership with bacteria so intimate that the boundary between the worm and its microscopic partners had essentially dissolved. Perhaps most memorably of all, they discovered evidence of the giant squid, not the creature itself, which was far too clever to be caught in nets, but pieces of it. Enormous tentacles, fragments of body, and most dramatically, the massive beak of a squid larger than any creature the scientists had imagined possible. These fragments spoke of an intelligence moving through the deep, a vast and alien mind that had been sharing our planet all along. Unknown and unknowable. The discoveries of the Challenger expedition were so numerous, so extraordinary, that it took scientists decades to catalog and study them all. The voyage's final report filled 50 volumes, each one describing creatures that expanded humanity's understanding of what life could be. The expedition proved beyond doubt that the deep ocean wasn't a desert, but rather the largest living space on our planet, teeming with life forms that had found ways to thrive in conditions that had seemed impossible, but perhaps the most beautiful. Discovery of the Challenger expedition wasn't any single creature, but rather the realization that our world still held profound mysteries, that wonder was still possible, that the age of discovery was far from over. These Victorian scientists, sailing across the world's oceans in their converted warship, had opened a door to a universe that existed right here on Earth. Beneath the familiar surface of the sea. As you drift toward sleep tonight, imagine yourself aboard that ship, standing at the rail in the soft lamplight as the nets come up from the depths. Feel the gentle rocking of the waves, the salt breeze carrying whispers of mystery. In your dreams, perhaps you too can be an explorer, discovering creatures that exist nowhere else in the universe, but in the quiet depths of our own beautiful, impossible planet. Now we descend beyond the twilight zone, beyond the reach of even the faintest echo of sunlight, into the midnight zone of the ocean. Here, 3 kilometers below the surface, we enter a realm that has never known day or night as we understand them. Instead, this world creates its own rhythms, its own gentle cycles of light and darkness through the quiet breathing of bioluminescent life. Imagine yourself not as a visitor to this place, but as a creature born to these depths. Your body is soft and yielding, perfectly shaped by millions of years of evolution to glide through liquid space. You have no need for the rigid bones and muscles that help surface dwellers fight gravity. Here, the water supports you completely, cradles you like the most comfortable bed you've ever known. Your eyes are enormous, perhaps a third the size of your entire head, dark and gentle, designed to catch the faintest photon of light that might drift your way. These are not the quick, darting eyes of surface creatures, always looking for the next thing, the next movement. These are the eyes of a meditation master, patient and deep, capable of seeing beauty in the smallest glimmer. Along your sides run rows of photophores, your personal constellation of lights. You can control each one individually, creating patterns as complex as music, as beautiful as poetry. When you're feeling playful, you might create waves of light that ripple along your body like gentle laughter. When you're searching for companionship, you pulse in the specific rhythm that others of your kind recognize. A heartbeat made visible, a song sung in light. You move through your 3-dimensional world with a grace that would make dancers weep with envy. There is no up or down here, only the eternal dance of currents, the subtle changes in temperature and salinity that guide you like invisible roads through liquid space. You might spend hours suspended motionless in the water, feeling the gentle pulse of your own circulation, the quiet exchange of gases through your gills, the peaceful rhythm of simply being alive. Not sometimes, you encounter others in this vast space. A school of lanternfish might pass by, their lights twinkling like a constellation come to life, each fish maintaining perfect spacing from its neighbors, through senses we surface dwellers can barely imagine. They move as one organism, turning and diving in perfect synchronization, creating shapes of living light that bloom and fade like flowers made of stars. Or perhaps you'll meet one of the gentle giants of the deep, a giant isopod, a creature that looks like a pill bug grown to the size of a small dog. These ancient beings move with infinite patience across the seafloor, their 14 legs carrying them in a slow-motion dance that has remained unchanged for hundreds of millions of years. They are living links to the distant past, reminders that in the deep ocean, time moves differently, that patience is not just a virtue, but a way of life. In this world, seasons don't exist as we know them. Instead, there are other rhythms, simpler cycles that pulse through the depths. Sometimes there are marine snow events, showers of organic matter drifting down from the surface world above, like nutrients delivered by an invisible hand. During these times, the entire community comes alive in slow motion, filter feeders extending their delicate arms, bottom dwellers stirring from their restful positions, everyone participating in a quiet feast that might last for days. The water around you carries information in ways that surface dwellers struggle to understand. Chemical messages drift on the currents, pheromones that speak of companionship, alarm signals that whisper of distant danger, the biological signatures of creatures miles away. You read these messages the way surface dwellers read facial expressions, gathering information about your world through senses that have no names in our surface language. Pressure changes tell stories too. The movement of massive creatures far away creates gentle pressure waves that travel through the water like whispered news. A whale diving from the surface world sends ripples through the depths that creatures here can feel and interpret. Even tectonic activity on the ocean floor creates subtle vibrations that become part of the constant, quiet conversation of the deep. In this world, reproduction often happens through the most gentle and patient means imaginable. Some creatures simply release their reproductive cells into the current, trusting to chance and chemistry that they will find their perfect match somewhere in the vast water column. Others engage in slow-motion courtship dances, spiraling around each other in patterns that might take hours to complete. Their bioluminescent displays, creating private light shows for an audience of two. There is violence here, yes, the eternal dance of predator and prey continues even in the gentlest depths. But even this happens with a kind of dreamy grace. Most hunting is done through patience rather than speed, through lures rather than chase, through the quiet wisdom of knowing that in a world of limited energy, every movement must be purposeful, every action considered. In the deepest trenches of the ocean, where the pressure is more than 1,000 times greater than its sea level, there lives a fish called the snailfish. This remarkable creature, discovered only recently in the deepest parts of the Pacific Ocean, has no swim bladder, that gas-filled organ that helps most fish control their buoyancy. Instead, its entire body is filled with a special antifreeze protein that keeps it fluid and flexible under crushing pressure that would destroy almost any other form of life. It swims through its impossible world with the grace of a living poem, proving that life always finds a way to bloom, even in the most unlikely places. Perhaps even more surprising is the discovery that some deep-sea creatures are essentially immortal. The immortal jellyfish, though small enough to fit on your fingertip, has learned to reverse its aging process completely. When faced with stress, injury, or old age, it simply transforms back into its juvenile form and begins life again. Scientists have been unable to find any natural limit to how many times it can perform this miracle of renewal. Somewhere in the deep ocean tonight, there may be jellyfish that have lived through countless cycles of death and rebirth, carrying within their simple bodies the secret to eternal life. The deep ocean is also home to the largest living structures on Earth, not the blue whales that visit from the surface, but the giant fungal networks that spread across the seafloor. These underwater fungi create vast, interconnected webs that can stretch for miles, connecting different communities of deep-sea life in ways scientists are only beginning to understand. They share nutrients, information, perhaps even something we might recognize as communication across these living networks that predate the first forests on land by hundreds of millions of years. One of the most peaceful discoveries in recent decades has been the existence of whale falls. When a great whale dies and sinks to the ocean floor, it becomes an oasis of life in the deep. The whale's body, sometimes weighing as much as several elephants, provides food for an entire community of deep-sea creatures for decades. First come the hagfish and sleeper sharks, moving in slow motion through the bounty. Then smaller creatures arrive to clean the bones. Finally, bacteria move in to digest the very bones themselves, creating a chemical environment that supports tube worms and other creatures found nowhere else on Earth. A single whale fall can support unique life for 50 years or more, a final gift from the surface world to the depths below, perhaps most. Wonderfully, scientists have discovered that many deep-sea creatures sing, not with voices as we understand them, but through vibrations, through patterns of bioluminescence, through chemical signals that create something remarkably like music. Sperm whales diving to hunt in the deep create click patterns so complex and varied that scientists believe they constitute a language, perhaps the most sophisticated non-human communication system on Earth. These clicks travel for miles through the deep water, and whales separated by vast distances can apparently hold conversations that last for hours. The vampire squid, despite its dramatic name, has perhaps the most peaceful lifestyle of any creature in the deep. It lives in the oxygen minimum zone, where there's so little dissolved oxygen that most creatures can't survive. But the vampire squid has adapted to this challenging environment by developing the lowest metabolic rate of any active animal on Earth. It moves so slowly, so efficiently, that it uses less energy than creatures in hibernation. It can literally go months between meals, drifting through its world in a state of gentle meditation, disturbing nothing, consuming almost nothing, simply existing in perfect harmony with its environment. Some deep-sea creatures have developed time sense that operates on scales almost impossible for us to imagine. Giant tube worms near hydrothermal vents can live for hundreds of years, growing so slowly that their increase in size is barely measurable from year to year. They experience seasons not as we do, in months, but in decades. Their lives unfold like slow-motion films, each year containing what would be moments in our surface lives. Most remarkably, the deep ocean contains vast migrations that dwarf any movement of life on land. Every night, billions of creatures rise from the depths toward the surface in what scientists call the deep scattering layer. This vertical migration happens every single day, the largest migration on Earth, involving more biomass than all the land animals combined. They rise to feed in the rich surface waters under cover of darkness, then sink back down to the safety of the depths before dawn. This gentle breathing of the ocean, this daily pulse of life moving up and down through the water column, has been happening for millions of years, largely invisible to us surface dwellers, a reminder that our planet pulses with life in ways we're only beginning to understand. In the deepest trenches, scientists have found creatures that feed on wood. Not driftwood that has recently fallen from the surface, but ancient wood that has been buried in the seafloor for thousands of years. These wood-eating clams and bacteria have learned to digest cellulose in the high-pressure environment of the deep, creating thriving communities around sunken logs that fell into the ocean when the pyramids were being built, when Rome was an empire, when the first humans were learning to cultivate crops. Asterisk, asterisk, as we float here in the liquid darkness, surrounded by creatures that seem to have been imagined rather than evolved. It's worth pausing to consider what these beings of the deep might teach us about the very nature of existence. In their gentle, patient lives, lived out in the most challenging environment on our planet, they offer lessons that perhaps we surface dwellers have forgotten in our hurried world of light and noise. Consider the profound patience of deep sea life. In a world where energy is precious and food is scarce, every movement must be considered, every action purposeful. The creatures here have learned something we might call the art of being still. They can wait months between meals, years between encounters with their own kind, decades between opportunities to reproduce. Yet they do not suffer from this patience. It is simply their way of being, as natural to them as breathing. What would our lives look like if we could embrace such patience? If we could find contentment in the spaces between events, beauty in the quiet moments when nothing seems to be happening? The deep-sea creatures remind us that life is not always about movement and action, but sometimes about the profound peace of simply existing, of being present in the moment without needing to rush toward the next thing. There's also something deeply moving about how these creatures have learned to create light in a world without sun. In the deepest, darkest places on Earth, life has found a way to illuminate itself. Each creature carries its own constellation, its own way of bringing light to the darkness. This isn't just biology, it's poetry, it's hope made visible. It suggests that even in our darkest moments, we too carry within us the ability to create light, to find ways to shine even when the world around us seems impossibly dark. The interconnectedness of deep sea life offers another profound lesson. In the surface world, we often think of ourselves as separate, independent beings. But in the deep ocean, the boundaries between creatures often blur. The giant tube worms and their bacterial partners have become so intertwined that they're essentially one organism. The vast fungal networks that connect communities across the seafloor suggest that individual identity might be less important than we imagine, that we're all part of larger, more mysterious connections than we typically recognize. Perhaps, most beautifully, these creatures demonstrate that adaptation doesn't mean struggle. It means finding peace with your environment, whatever that environment might be. The pressure that would crush us is simply the medium through which they move. The cold that would freeze us is their comfortable home temperature. The darkness that would terrify us is their natural state of being. They remind us that every challenge can become, with time and patience, simply another aspect of home. The way deep-sea creatures move through three-dimensional space also offers a different way of thinking about freedom. We surface dwellers are largely confined to moving across the surface of things, the ground, the ocean, the floor of our homes. But deep-sea creatures live in true three-dimensional freedom, able to move up, down, forward, backward, sideways, with equal ease. They inhabit space in a way that's almost like flight, but gentler, more fluid. They remind us that there are always more directions to move than we initially imagine, always more possibilities than our surface-bound perspective might suggest. There's something profound, too, about how these creatures experience time. In a world without sunrise or sunset, without seasons as we know them, time becomes something different, not a ruler that measures and constrains, but a medium to move through, like water itself. The centuries-old tube worms, the potentially immortal jellyfish, the migrations that pulse through the water column, on schedules older than human civilization, they all suggest that our hurried relationship with time might not be the only way to experience existence. In the deepest trenches of the ocean, where the pressure is more than 1,000 times greater than its sea level, there lives a fish called the snailfish. This remarkable creature, discovered only recently in the deepest parts of the Pacific Ocean, has no swim bladder, that gas-filled organ that helps most fish control their buoyancy. Instead, its entire body is filled with a special antifreeze protein that keeps it fluid and flexible under crushing pressure that would destroy almost any other form of life. It swims through its impossible world with the grace of a living poem, proving that life always finds a way to bloom, even in the most unlikely places. Perhaps even more surprising is the discovery that some deep-sea creatures are essentially immortal. The immortal jellyfish, though small enough to fit on your fingertip, has learned to reverse its aging process completely. When faced with stress, injury, or old age, it simply transforms back into its juvenile form and begins life again. Scientists have been unable to find any natural limit to how many times it can perform this miracle of renewal. Somewhere in the deep ocean tonight, there may be jellyfish that have lived through countless cycles of death and rebirth, carrying within their simple bodies the secret to eternal life. The deep ocean is also home to the largest living structures on Earth, not the blue whales that visit from the surface, but the giant fungal networks that spread across the seafloor. These underwater fungi create vast, interconnected webs that can stretch for miles, connecting different communities of deep-sea life in ways scientists are only beginning to understand. They share nutrients, information, perhaps even something we might recognize as communication across these living networks that predate the first forests on land by hundreds of millions of years. One of the most peaceful discoveries in recent decades has been the existence of whale falls. When a great whale dies and sinks to the ocean floor, it becomes an oasis of life in the deep. The whale's body, sometimes weighing as much as several elephants, provides food for an entire community of deep-sea creatures for decades. First come the hagfish and sleeper sharks, moving in slow motion through the bounty. Then smaller creatures arrive to clean the bones. Finally, bacteria move in to digest the very bones themselves, creating a chemical environment that supports tube worms and other creatures found nowhere else on Earth. A single whale fall can support unique life for 50 years or more, a final gift from the surface world to the depths below. Perhaps most wonderfully, scientists have discovered that many deep-sea creatures sing, not with voices as we understand them, but through vibrations, through patterns of bioluminescence, through chemical signals that create something remarkably like music. Sperm whales diving to hunt in the deep create click patterns so complex and varied that scientists believe they constitute a language, perhaps the most sophisticated non-human communication system on Earth. These clicks travel for miles through the deep water, and whales separated by vast distances can apparently hold conversations that last for hours. The vampire squid, despite its dramatic name, has perhaps the most peaceful lifestyle of any creature in the deep. It lives in the oxygen minimum zone, where there's so little dissolved oxygen that most creatures can't survive. But the vampire squid has adapted to this challenging environment by developing the lowest metabolic rate of any active animal on Earth. It moves so slowly, so efficiently, that it uses less energy than creatures in hibernation. It can literally go months between meals, drifting through its world in a state of gentle meditation, disturbing nothing, consuming almost nothing, simply existing in perfect harmony with its environment. Some deep-sea creatures have developed time sense that operates on scales almost impossible for us to imagine. Giant tube worms near hydrothermal vents can live for hundreds of years, growing so slowly that their increase in size is barely measurable from year to year. They experience seasons not as we do, in months, but in decades. Their lives unfold like slow-motion films, each year containing what would be moments in our surface lives. Most remarkably, the deep ocean contains vast migrations that dwarf any movement of life on land. Every night, billions of creatures rise from the depths toward the surface in what scientists call the deep scattering layer. This vertical migration happens every single day, the largest migration on Earth, involving more biomass than all the land animals combined. They rise to feed in the rich surface waters under cover of darkness, then sink back down to the safety of the depths before dawn. This gentle breathing of the ocean, this daily pulse of life moving up and down through the water column, has been happening for millions of years, largely invisible to us surface dwellers, a reminder that our planet pulses with life in ways we're only beginning to understand. In the deepest trenches, scientists have found creatures that feed on wood. Not driftwood that has recently fallen from the surface, but ancient wood that has been buried in the seafloor for thousands of years. These wood-eating clams and bacteria have learned to digest cellulose in the high-pressure environment of the deep, creating thriving communities around sunken logs that fell into the ocean when the pyramids were being built, when Rome was an empire when the first humans were learning to cultivate crops. Asterisk, asterisk, as we float here in the liquid darkness, surrounded by creatures that seem to have been imagined rather than evolved. It's worth pausing to consider what these beings of the deep might teach us about the very nature of existence. In their gentle, patient lives, lived out in the most challenging environment on our planet, they offer lessons that perhaps we surface dwellers have forgotten in our hurried world of light and noise. Consider the profound patience of deep sea life. In a world where energy is precious and food is scarce, every movement must be considered, every action purposeful. The creatures here have learned something we might call the art of being still. They can wait months between meals, years between encounters with their own kind, decades between opportunities to reproduce. Yet they do not suffer from this patience. It is simply their way of being, as natural to them as breathing. What would our lives look like if we could embrace such patience? If we could find contentment in the spaces between events, beauty in the quiet moments when nothing seems to be happening. The deep-sea creatures remind us that life is not always about movement and action, but sometimes about the profound peace of simply existing, of being present in the moment without needing to rush toward the next thing. There's also something deeply moving about how these creatures have learned to create light in a world without sun. In the deepest, darkest places on Earth, life has found a way to illuminate itself. Each creature carries its own constellation, its own way of bringing light to the darkness. This isn't just biology. It's poetry. It's hope made visible. It suggests that even in our darkest moments, we too carry within us the ability to create light, to find ways to shine even when the world around us seems impossibly dark. The interconnectedness of deep sea life offers another profound lesson. In the surface world, we often think of ourselves as separate, independent beings. But in the deep ocean, the boundaries between creatures often blur. The giant tube worms and their bacterial partners have become so intertwined that they're essentially one organism. The vast fungal networks that connect communities across the seafloor suggest that individual identity might be less important than we imagine, that we're all part of larger, more mysterious connections than we typically recognize. Perhaps, most beautifully, these creatures demonstrate that adaptation doesn't mean struggle. It means finding peace with your environment, whatever that environment might be. The pressure that would crush us is simply the medium through which they move. The cold that would freeze us is their comfortable home temperature. The darkness that would terrify us is their natural state of being. They remind us that every challenge can become, with time and patience, simply another aspect of home. The way deep-sea creatures move through three-dimensional space also offers a different way of thinking about freedom. We surface dwellers are largely confined to moving across the surface of things, the ground, the ocean, the floor of our homes. But deep-sea creatures live in true three-dimensional freedom, able to move up, down, forward, backward, sideways, with equal ease. They inhabit space in a way that's almost like flight, but gentler, more fluid. They remind us that there are always more directions to move than we initially imagine, always more possibilities than our surface-bound perspective might suggest. There's something profound, too, about how these creatures experience time. In a world without sunrise or sunset, without seasons as we know them, time becomes something different, not a ruler that measures and constrains, but a medium to move through, like water itself. The centuries-old tube worms, the potentially immortal jellyfish, the migrations that pulse through the water column, on schedules older than human civilization, they all suggest that our hurried relationship with time might not be the only way to experience existence. The bioluminescence of the deep sea also speaks to something fundamental about communication and beauty. These creatures haven't just evolved ways to see each other in the dark. They've evolved ways to be beautiful to each other. Their light patterns serve practical purposes, yes, but they're also undeniably artistic, creative, expressive. Even in the most remote places on Earth, life creates beauty, not just as a byproduct, but as a fundamental aspect of being alive. And finally, there's the simple fact that these creatures exist at all. In places that seem impossible for life, life not only survives, but thrives, creates beauty, develops complexity, finds joy. If life can flourish in the crushing depths of the ocean, in the eternal darkness, in the bone-chilling cold, then perhaps life, all life, including our own, is more resilient, more creative, more hopeful than we sometimes believe. The deep ocean creatures don't just survive their impossible world. They make it beautiful. They transform the most challenging environment on Earth into a place of wonder, of mystery, of gentle magic. They remind us that no matter how dark things might seem, there's always the possibility of creating light, of finding others who share our particular way of seeing, of moving through even the most difficult circumstances with grace and patience. And hope. As we continue to drift through these contemplative depths, let us consider what the deep-sea creatures teach us about solitude and community. In the vast spaces of the deep ocean, encounters between individuals are rare and precious events. A creature might swim for weeks or months without meeting another of its kind. Yet when these meetings do occur, they're often marked by elaborate rituals of recognition, by displays of light and movement that seem to celebrate the simple miracle of finding another consciousness in the vastness. This suggests a different relationship with loneliness than we surface dwellers often experience. The deep-sea creatures don't seem to suffer from their solitude. Instead, they appear to find a kind of peace in their own company, a contentment in the quiet communion with the water that surrounds them. Their solitude isn't empty or desperate, but rather full of possibility, rich with the potential for eventual connection. When they do encounter others, these meetings take on a sacred quality. The deep-sea anglerfish, for example, engages in one of the most intimate relationships in the animal kingdom. The much smaller male actually fuses with the female's body, becoming essentially a living organ devoted to reproduction. While this might seem strange to us, it speaks to a profound truth about partnership, the willingness to give oneself completely to another, to become part of something larger than individual existence. The filter feeders of the deep teach us about sustenance and gratitude. These creatures, the giant tube worms, the sea fans, the various coral-like animals, don't hunt or chase their food. Instead, they extend themselves into the current and accept whatever nutrition the ocean brings them. They've learned to find sustenance in the gentlest possible way, by opening themselves to what the world offers rather than pursuing what they think they need. There's a profound trust in this way of living, trust that the ocean will provide, that the gentle rain of nutrients from above will continue, that patience will be rewarded. They remind us that sometimes the most effective way to meet our needs is not through aggressive pursuit, but through careful positioning, through making ourselves available to receive what the universe wants to give us. The migrations of deep-sea creatures offer another meditation on rhythm and intuition. These vertical journeys that happen every day, involving billions of creatures rising toward the surface at night and sinking back down before dawn, represent one of the most synchronized movements of life on Earth. Yet there's no leader, no external signal that starts this migration. Each creature simply knows, through some deep biological wisdom, when it's time to rise and when it's time to descend. This suggests that rhythm is built into the very fabric of life, that there are pulses and cycles we can tune into if we quiet ourselves enough to listen. The deep-sea creatures don't question their instincts or second-guess their timing. They simply move when movement feels right, rest when rest is needed, rise when rising serves them, sink when sinking brings them home. The way these creatures have adapted to pressure offers a particularly rich metaphor for human experience. The crushing pressure of the deep ocean, would destroy most surface life. Yet the creatures born to these depths don't experience it as crushing at all. It's simply the medium in which they live, as natural to them as air pressure is to us. Their bodies are designed to work with this pressure, not against it. Perhaps this is how we might learn to relate to the pressures in our own lives, not as forces to resist or escape, but as conditions to adapt to find ways of living within and through. The deep-sea creatures suggest that what seems impossible from one perspective can become not just possible, but comfortable, even beautiful, from another. The bioluminescence of these creatures also offers profound lessons about self-expression and authenticity. Each species has its own unique pattern of lights, its own way of communicating through illumination. They don't try to copy the light patterns of other species. Each one has found its own way to shine, its own language of light that expresses its essential nature. In a world where conformity often seems safer than authenticity, the deep-sea creatures remind us that true communication comes from expressing our own unique light, not from trying to imitate the brightness of others. They suggest that we each carry within us our own constellation, our own way of bringing light to the world that no one else can replicate. The longevity of some deep-sea creatures, the centuries-old corals, the potentially immortal jellyfish, the tube worms that outlive human generations, offers a different perspective on the passage of time and the meaning of a life well lived. These creatures don't achieve immortality through frantic activity or constant growth, but through patience, through efficiency, through finding sustainable ways of being that can continue almost indefinitely. They remind us that a meaningful life might not be measured in achievements or acquisitions, but in the quality of our presence, in our ability to exist peacefully within our environment, in the gentleness with which we move through our days. They suggest that true success might be found not in burning brightly for a short time, but in glowing gently for as long as possible. In the deepest contemplation of these remarkable beings, we find ourselves face to face with one of the most profound questions life can ask. What does it mean to be alive in a universe that often seems indifferent to existence? The creatures of the deep ocean provide a beautiful answer through the simple fact of their thriving presence in places where logic suggests nothing should be able to live at all. Consider the profound acceptance these creatures demonstrate. They don't rage against the darkness. They learn to see within it. They don't fight the pressure. They let it support them. They don't struggle against the cold. They make it their comfortable home. In their peaceful adaptation to conditions that would seem hostile to us, they teach us something essential about the art of working with reality rather than against it. This isn't passive surrender, but rather a kind of active grace, the ability to find ways to flourish within whatever circumstances we find ourselves in. The deep-sea creatures suggest that true strength might not lie in our ability to change our environment, but in our capacity to change ourselves, to find creative ways of being that transform challenge into opportunity, isolation into contemplation, darkness into a canvas for our own inner light. The way these creatures inhabit time offers another profound teaching. In the surface world, we often experience time as a river carrying us along, sometimes gently, sometimes in rapids that leave us breathless. But in the deep ocean, time seems more like a vast, still lake, present everywhere, but without the urgent current that characterizes our surface experience of temporal flow. The centuries-old organisms of the deep don't seem to experience the anxiety about time that often plagues us surface dwellers. They don't appear to worry about wasting time or running out of time. Instead, they inhabit each moment fully, whether that moment lasts seconds or seasons. They remind us that time is not something we possess or lose, but rather a medium we move through, like the water that surrounds these gentle beings. The feeding strategies of deep-sea creatures offer yet another meditation on trust and receptivity. Many of these beings are what scientists call sit-and-wait predators, but there's nothing aggressive about their waiting. They position themselves in the currents and then rest in perfect stillness, sometimes for days or weeks, until the right opportunity drifts their way. Their patience isn't tinged with frustration or anxiety. It's simply a peaceful state of readiness, a willingness to be present until the moment for action naturally arrives. This teaches us something profound about the difference between passive waiting and active patience. The deep-sea creatures aren't passive. They're vibrantly, consciously present, fully aware and ready. But they don't exhaust themselves with unnecessary movement or worry. They've learned the art of conserving energy for what truly matters, of being completely available without being desperately grasping. Asterisk. The symbiotic relationships that flourish in the deep ocean also offer profound insights into interdependence and mutual support. The giant tube worms that have no digestive systems of their own, but instead host bacteria that transform toxic chemicals into nutrition, represent a kind of partnership that goes beyond cooperation into genuine unity. The boundaries between the worm and its bacterial partners have become so blurred that they function as a single organism, each completely dependent on the other for survival. This suggests a way of being in relationship that transcends the usual categories of giving and taking. These partnerships aren't transactional, they're transformational, creating something entirely new that couldn't exist without the complete integration of both partners. They remind us that our deepest connections with others might not be about maintaining our separate identities while occasionally helping each other, but about allowing ourselves to become part of something larger and more beautiful than we could ever be alone. The vertical migrations that pulse through the ocean every day offer a final meditation on rhythm and collective wisdom. Billions of creatures participate in this daily journey, yet there's no central coordination, no leader directing the movement. Each individual creature simply responds to subtle cues, changes in light, chemical signals, the movement of currents, and makes its own decision about when to rise and when to descend. Yet somehow, this creates one of the most synchronized movements of life on Earth. It suggests that true coordination doesn't require external control or rigid organization, but rather emerges naturally when individuals are deeply attuned to their environment and to each other. The migration happens not because it's planned, but because it's the natural expression of millions of creatures following their deepest wisdom about how to live in harmony with the rhythms of their world. As we float here in these contemplative depths, surrounded by the gentle pulse of bioluminescent life, we might ask ourselves, what would it mean to live with such attunement to the natural rhythms around us? What would change in our lives if we could trust, as these creatures do, that there is a deeper intelligence at work in the universe, a wisdom that we can participate in simply by becoming quiet enough to listen, present enough to respond? The deep-sea creatures don't struggle against the mystery of existence. They embody it. They dance with it. They add their own unique notes to the vast, quiet symphony of life that plays in the darkness. They remind us that we too are part of this symphony, that our lives too can be expressions of the same patience, the same trust, the same willingness to create beauty, even in the most unlikely circumstances. Asterisk, asterisk, as we drift even deeper into these philosophical waters, let us contemplate the profound simplicity that characterizes life in the deep ocean. Here, stripped of the complexities and distractions of the surface world, existence is reduced to its most essential elements: the gentle rhythm of breathing, the patient search for sustenance, the quiet awareness of one's place in the vast web of life. The creatures here don't struggle with questions of purpose or meaning in the way we surface dwellers often do. A jellyfish doesn't wonder whether its life has significance. It simply pulses through the water, following currents, responding to chemical signals, existing in perfect harmony with its nature. Its purpose is not something external to be discovered, but something inherent to be expressed through the simple act of living. This suggests a different relationship with the question of meaning than our complex surface minds often entertain. Perhaps meaning isn't something we need to find or create, but something we can embody simply by being fully present to our own nature, by moving through our lives with the same graceful acceptance that characterizes the dance of deep-sea creatures. Through their liquid world, the transparency of many deep-sea creatures offers another profound metaphor for authentic living. In the depths where there's no sunlight to cast shadows, many creatures have evolved to be essentially see-through. Their internal workings are visible, their hearts beat in plain sight, their digestive systems process food in full view. Theirs number hiding, no pretense, no carefully constructed facade to maintain. Yet this transparency isn't vulnerability in any negative sense. It's simply honesty, a way of being that doesn't require the energy of concealment. These transparent creatures suggest that there might be a kind of strength in openness, a peace that comes from having nothing to hide, from allowing our inner workings to be visible to those who care to truly see us. The way sound travels in the deep ocean offers yet another meditation on communication and connection. In the dense medium of deep water, sounds can travel for incredible distances. The songs of whales can be heard across entire ocean basins, the clicks of hunting. Dolphins can echo for miles. Yet these sounds don't compete with each other or create chaos. Instead, they form a vast, underwater soundscape where each creature's voice finds its own frequency, its own time to speak and be heard. This suggests a model of communication based not on volume or urgency, but on finding our authentic voice and trusting that it will reach those who need to hear it. The creatures of the deep don't shout to be heard. They simply sing their true song and trust the medium of water to carry it to the right ears. The seasonal rhythms that do exist in the deep ocean, the periodic rain of nutrients from above, the subtle temperature changes that occur over years rather than months, remind us that patience can be its own form of wisdom. These creatures have learned to work with cycles that unfold over time frames that dwarf our surface understanding of seasonal change. They don't try to force growth or reproduction according to arbitrary schedules, but instead wait for the deep rhythms of their world to indicate when the time is right. In our hurried surface world, we often try to impose our own timing on natural processes, to force outcomes according to our impatience, rather than allowing them to unfold according to their own inherent wisdom. The deep-sea creatures suggest that there might be great peace in learning to recognize and work with the larger rhythms that govern our lives, even when those rhythms move more slowly than our surface minds would prefer. The way these creatures respond to the rare but traumatic events in their world, the occasional whale fall that brings abundance, the periodic eruptions of underwater volcanoes that create new habitats, the slow movements of tectonic plates that reshape their entire environment over geological time, teaches us about resilience and adaptability. They don't resist change or mourn the passing of old conditions. Instead, they find ways to thrive within whatever new reality emerges. This kind of resilience isn't based on strength in the conventional sense, but rather on flexibility, on the willingness to let go of old patterns and discover new ways of being. The creatures of the deep remind us that true stability might not come from rigidity, but from our capacity to flow with change while maintaining our essential nature. Perhaps most beautifully, the deep-sea creatures demonstrate that it's possible to live a rich, meaningful existence, even in conditions of scarcity. Food is rare in the deep ocean. Opportunities for reproduction may come once in a lifetime. Encounters with others of one's own species might be separated by years. Yet these creatures don't live lives of desperate deprivation. They found ways to extract beauty and satisfaction from whatever their environment provides. Asterisk, asterisk, as we reach the deepest point of our contemplative journey, floating now in the profound silence of the ocean's heart, we encounter perhaps the most moving lesson. These creatures of the deep have to offer the art of finding home in the most unlikely places. Every being we've met in these depths has taken conditions that would seem impossible for life and transformed them into not just survival, but into beauty, into community, into expressions of the deepest creativity life can achieve. The giant tube worms clustered around hydrothermal vents have made their home next to what are essentially underwater volcanoes, where toxic chemicals pour out at temperatures that would melt lead. Yet they've turned this hellish landscape into a garden, partnering with bacteria to transform poison into sustenance, creating oases of life in the most barren places on Earth. They remind us that home isn't always about finding the perfect conditions, but about learning to bloom wherever we happen to take root. In the deepest trenches, where the pressure would crush a human body in milliseconds, creatures move with the grace of dancers, their bodies perfectly adapted to conditions that represent the extreme limits of what our planet can offer. They don't struggle against their environment. They've learned to make it their own, to find comfort in the very conditions that would destroy most other forms of life. They teach us that adaptability isn't about changing who we are, but about discovering new ways to express our essential nature in whatever circumstances we find ourselves. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The bioluminescent displays that light up the darkness around us speak to something profound about hope and communication. In a world where no light has ever penetrated from outside, these creatures have learned to create their own illumination, their own ways of finding each other across the vast darkness. Each species has developed its own language of light. Some flash in rapid sequences like Morse code. Others glow steadily like underwater beacons. Still others create complex patterns that pulse and flow like living constellations. This reminds us that even in our darkest moments, we too carry the capacity to create light, to find ways of reaching out to others, to transform isolation into connection, through the simple act of sharing our authentic selves. The creatures of the deep don't wait for external light to find their way. They become the light they need to see. The ancient patience of these depths offers perhaps the most profound teaching of all. Here, where a single meal might sustain a creature for months, where reproduction might happen once in a lifetime, where individuals might wait decades for the right conditions to mate or migrate, time moves according to rhythms that dwarf our surface understanding of urgency. Yet there's no sense of frustration or impatience in this waiting, only a deep trust in the unfolding of natural cycles. These creatures have learned something we surface dwellers often forget, that not everything meaningful happens quickly, that some of life's most beautiful expressions require patience that spans not just seasons but years, decades, even centuries. The deep-sea corals that grow for hundreds of years, adding microscopic layers of beauty year after year, remind us that lasting meaning often emerges not from dramatic gestures, but from the quiet consistency of showing up, day after day, too. Add our own small contribution to something larger than ourselves, the way these creatures experience. Solitude offers another profound gift to our understanding. In the vast spaces of the deep ocean, most creatures spend the majority of their lives alone, sometimes traveling for months without encountering another member of their species. Yet this solitude isn't lonely in the way we surface dwellers might. Experience it. It's rich, contemplative, full of awareness and presence. They teach us that being alone doesn't have to mean being lonely. That solitude can be a form of communion with the deeper currents of existence. In their peaceful solitude, they remind us that we always have the company of the vast mystery that surrounds us, that we're never truly alone as long as we remain open to the subtle connections that link us to all life. The symbiotic relationships that flourish in these depths, creatures so intimately connected that they function as single organisms, offer a final meditation on what it means to truly belong. These partnerships go beyond mutual benefit into genuine unity, where the boundaries between self and other dissolve into something new and beautiful. They suggest that our deepest fulfillment might come not from maintaining our separateness, but from allowing ourselves to become part of something larger, more mysterious, more wonderful than we could ever be alone. As we begin to slowly, gently rise from these contemplative depths, we carry with us the quiet wisdom of the deep sea creatures, that life finds a way to bloom anywhere, that patience is its own form of strength, that beauty can emerge from the most unlikely conditions, and that we each carry within us the capacity to create light in even the darkest circumstances. The creatures of the deep ocean remind us that existence itself is a miracle, that consciousness is a gift beyond measure, and that every moment we have to experience the mystery of being alive is precious beyond words. In their gentle, patient presence, we find a model for living that emphasizes being overdoing, presence over productivity, wonder over worry. Asterisk, asterisk, and now, dear traveler, as our journey through the deep ocean draws to its gentle close, we begin our slow ascent back toward the surface, carrying with us the profound peace and wisdom we've discovered in the depths. Like a deep-sea creature rising through the water column at the end of a long, contemplative dive, we move slowly, allowing the pressure to decrease gradually, letting our minds adjust to the transition from the profound depths back to the familiar world above. As we rise, we pass once more through the midnight zone, where bioluminescent creatures pulse their gentle greetings in the darkness, their lights twinkling like underwater stars, bidding us farewell. The vampire squid drifts past in its meditative trance, reminding us one final time that peace can be found in the slowest rhythms, in the deepest patience. The giant isopods continue their ancient crawl across the seafloor, carrying within their ancient bodies the wisdom of millions of years of gentle persistence. Higher we rise, through the twilight zone, where the last traces of sunlight meet the first glimmers of biological light, where the boundary between the surface world and the deep ocean creates its own magical twilight. Here, the lanternfish continue their eternal migration, rising and falling with the rhythms that have governed their kind since long before humans walked the earth. In their endless dance between the depths and the shallows, they remind us that life is movement, but movement with purpose, with rhythm, with trust in the deeper currents that guide us all. The creatures we've met tonight will continue their quiet lives long after we return to our surface world. The giant tube forms will pulse gently around their hydrothermal vents, transforming poison into sustenance through the alchemy of patient partnership. The transparent jellyfish will continue their slow-motion ballet through the water column, their bodies like living glass sculptures animated by the mysterious force we call life. The ancient corals will add another microscopic layer to their centuries-long artwork, building beauty grain by grain, year by year, with the patience of geological time. As we approach the surface, we can begin to see the faint glow of starlight filtering down through the water, the familiar glimmer that marks the boundary between the ocean's mystery and the sky's infinity. But we're not the same travelers who descended into these depths hours ago. We carry within us now something of the deep ocean's patience, its acceptance, its profound peace with the mystery of existence. We've learned that life finds a way to bloom in the most impossible places, that beauty emerges not despite difficulty, but often because of it, that the most profound truths are often discovered not in the bright clarity of surface understanding, but in the gentle darkness of deep contemplation. We've seen that time can move at many different speeds, that solitude can be a form of communion, that the capacity to create light exists within every living being, no matter how dark their circumstances might seem. The deep-sea creatures have taught us that existence itself is an act of creativity, that consciousness is a gift to be cherished, and that every breath, every heartbeat, every moment of awareness is a participation in the greatest mystery the universe has to offer. They've shown us that we don't need to understand everything to appreciate everything, that questions can be more beautiful than answers, and that wonder is not something we lose as we grow older, but something we can cultivate and deepen throughout. Our lives dot as we break the surface at last. Feeling the familiar caress of air on our faces, we find ourselves changed by our journey. The stars above seem somehow connected to the bioluminescent displays we witnessed in the depths. The gentle rhythm of surface waves echoes the patient pulse of deep-sea jellyfish. The vast quiet of the night sky reminds us of the profound silence we found in the deepest places of the ocean. Take a moment now to feel your body resting comfortably, to notice the gentle rhythm of your breathing, the quiet beating of your heart. Like the creatures of the deep ocean, you too are a miracle of adaptation, a being perfectly designed to find peace and beauty in your particular environment. You too carry within you the capacity to create light in darkness, to find connection across vast distances, to move through your world with patience and grace. As you drift towards sleep tonight, remember the lessons of the deep, that every challenge can become a home, that patience is its own form of wisdom, that mystery is not something to be feared, but something to be embraced. Let the rhythm of your breathing become like the gentle pulsing of a deep-sea jellyfish, steady and peaceful and perfectly attuned to the larger rhythms of life. Wherever you are in the world tonight, whatever challenges you may be facing, whatever depths you may be navigating in your own life, remember that you are part of the same magnificent web of existence that includes the most extraordinary creatures in the deepest places of our planet. You are connected to the ancient tube worms and the immortal jellyfish, to the patient giants of the deep and the tiny lights that dance through eternal darkness. Rest now in that connection, in that belonging, in the profound peace that comes from knowing that you are exactly where you need to be, that your life is part of a story larger and more beautiful than any single mind can comprehend. Let the gentle darkness of sleep be like the welcoming depths of the ocean, a place of rest and renewal, of dreams and quiet contemplation. May your dreams tonight be filled with bioluminescent wonder, with the peaceful grace of deep-sea creatures moving through their liquid world. May you find in sleep the same profound rest that comes to creatures in the ocean's deepest places, where time moves slowly and every breath is a meditation on the simple miracle of being alive. Wherever you are, whatever time you're listening to this, I hope you're resting well tonight. May your dreams be as vast and mysterious as the deep ocean, as gentle and luminous as the creatures who call it home. May your mind find the peace of the depths, and may your heart be filled with the quiet wonder that illuminates even the darkest places.